this is a powerful lobby working on this, and I don't want to, diminish the challenges of this battle. It's often said that the lobby related to food and agriculture is larger than the defense industry lobby. And, most of us think about, it's the weapon systems where the real fights are. No, it's actually food systems, how we grow our food, the agriculture, the food processors. And of course, they have many economic reasons to not want to be held to a higher standard.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We are a grassroots, farmer-led movement creating an add-on organic food label to distinguish soil-grown crops and pasture-raised livestock under the organic seal. You just heard from U.S. Representative and Maine organic farmer Chellie Pingree. Chellie, a longtime friend to the organic movement, is the only farmer in the House of Representatives, and she also serves on the House Subcommittee for Agriculture. So let's dive into the conversation between my co-director Dave Chapman and U.S. Representative Chellie Pingree.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast, and I'm here in Washington, D.C. today talking with my old friend Chellie Pingree, Congresswoman from Maine. Hi, Chellie.
Hi, it's so great to join you. Thank you for coming here to D.C. in this strange time.
Yeah, this is my favorite stop in D.C. is coming to see you in the office.
Welcome anytime.
So I just was talking with Jon Tester, and he's the only farmer in the Senate, active farmer, and also, of course, the only organic farmer. Are you the only organic farmer in the House of Representatives?
I'm pretty sure I am. I think there might be one member who owns some organic grapes in California, but maybe doesn't actively farm them, but owns the farmland. But that's the only time I've ever heard anyone talk about it, so I guess so.
Good. Well, you stand and represent us, and you do. I saw you in a hearing, I don't know, a couple of years ago where you were grilling Greg Ibach, and deservedly so. He kept dodging questions. You know who was good on that was the guy from Indiana, Rodney.
Oh, yeah.
Smith, is it?
No, Rodney. Geez, now we're both forgetting his name.
Yeah.
Yeah, but well, he's the head of the Research Caucus.
Yeah.
Republican head, yeah. Rodney Davis.
Davis, thank you.
Yeah, and very engaged.
He wouldn't allow the question to be dodged. He went 3 times about why haven't you enacted a single recommendation from the NOSB in 10 years? And he was good. I didn't like the unfortunate final answer, which was, we're looking forward to choosing new people for the NOSB.
Yeah. That's a can of worms.
So could you tell me how you became an organic farmer?
Oh my goodness. That is truly ancient history. But I came to Maine as a teenager. I followed a boy who was going to be a back to the lander. He had a copy of the book by Helen and Scott Nearing, Living the Good Life, and living sustainably on the land. And even though I had grown up in Minnesota, my grandfather and uncle were dairy farmers, and I'd been around the dairy farm, that was the furthest thing from my mind growing up, is that I would ever be a farmer. But came to Maine, had the book, started reading all the books about, how to grow your own food, how to chop wood, we lived in a little cabin with no running water and electricity for 2 years. And I just, I started living the life. And after 2 years, realized that I knew so little about what I was supposed to do. And I was lucky enough to go to College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, and then doubly lucky because Elliot Coleman was one of my teachers. So then I really got engaged in understanding, the principles around organic farming and the principles around, how to grow food sustainably, not just, throwing some seeds in the soil. And, after that, became a farm apprentice for MOFGA, started the farm apprentice program as an employee of MOFGA, and then had my own little farm. So way back in the 70s, I had 3 dairy cows, 100 chickens, and 2 acres of vegetables, and had learned it all from those guys. And once I really started practicing it, I was hooked. That was the 70s and 80s, and I've had a farm on and off ever since then. And now I'm a farmer, but I'm really hands-off because I'm in Congress, but I've been able to actively participate in running my own farm with some really great people who, do the heavy lifting. But it's captivated me. And I've been really lucky because I served in the state legislature. And when I came to Congress in 2008, I found that there weren't that many people who wanted to talk about sustainable agriculture, who understood organic agriculture. The assignment to the Agriculture Committee in those days was you were either there to represent the cotton or the corn growers or the soybean people, or you were assigned there because it was a punishment and you couldn't make it to some other committee. I had no idea that this whole idea of, sort of food systems and would have so few followers or activists in Congress. And I will say, over the last decade, the interest has really grown, and I have many more colleagues who really understand the importance of sustainable agriculture and organic farming. Nobody understands it to a deeper level, but it's gotten a lot more support. And frankly, on both sides of the aisle, I think people have seen the markets that some of the organic farmers in their districts are able to captivate. They see the value and the practices that they use. So, it's not quite as crazy and partisan as when I first came.
Yeah, that's the enormously positive part of what's happening, and it is. I say that the absolute hopeful sign is that more and more eaters are choosing to buy organic. They want something grown in that way. They want something grown in fertile soil. They want animals that have been out in pasture, and they're willing to pay more for it. So that's wonderful. Now, the bad news is that more and more of what's being sold as organic doesn't meet those criteria. It's not grown in healthy soil. Some of it's not grown in soil at all. And more and more of the livestock are not outside on pasture. Significant amount of milk, probably over half now, is coming from confinement, CAFOs. For poultry, I believe it's more like 3/4. So this is a difficult thing. I have had the buyer for a major New England chain, when I suggested that there was a problem here, say, Dave, I'm sorry, but if it's good enough for the USDA, it's good enough for me. And he didn't know about organic, he didn't care, he understood that they had customers who did care. So here we have a situation in which USDA is actually redefining organic. I've seen you try to reverse that in Congress. How's that going?
Well, as you know, it's been quite a slog, and I just want to reemphasize the point that you made, because I think it really is. It's a very good sign. It's a paradox in a sense that organic food has achieved such popularity. It's a sign that people really care about what they eat. They're paying much more attention to what's in their food and how it's grown, and they really care about what they feed their children. There's just a lot of interest in making sure your kids eat healthy foods. But along with that has come this, massive change in the market, inability to meet the demand, and so all of a sudden you have, just a flooding in of products that really doesn't meet the standards. I do put the blame on the shoulders of the USDA. I've thought for decades it's a dereliction of duty when you have this market that is growing for American farmers to produce organically grown food, to not be supportive of that. And they're so late to the table, they've come so late to the table, that we don't meet the market demand. And so then you have, products flooding in from other countries, you have fraudulent products, just as you mentioned, and you have this, sort of lobbying going around to loosen up the standards. And, as you mentioned, you spoke to somebody and they said, well, I trust the USDA. And you know what? We damn well ought to be able to trust the USDA. That's why we have government, to make the regulations and make sure they're followed. And we know that doesn't happen. And, that's a real source of frustration. And it goes way beyond frustration for me. I mean, it's It's just unthinkable that things like the livestock and poultry rules have just never been finished, never been enforced. But that's people's livelihoods. And when you come from northern New England, you really see how farmers are being put out of business, have been put out of business, because if you don't follow the rules and you don't have to put your cows on pasture, which, let's face it, you're not producing as healthy of a product, well, then you can have 1,000 cow dairy. Then you can, do all these things to centralize your product, make it easier for the companies to buy from you or cheaper to produce the product. And, good hardworking family farmers who will follow every rule strictly and, get their organic certification by a certifier who really pays attention and won't let you skirt the rules, you can't afford to produce your product anymore. So I think it's, I can't say it enough. It's on the shoulders of the USDA. And I feel like I have a stronger group of people who are with me now in Congress who are, really on top of the USDA to get this done. We have yet another commitment that, a rule will be written by the end of the year. But I'm not gonna, cheer or applaud until I see that really in writing and done. And every day that these things aren't done, it's another farmer that, just can't make a go of it.
You're talking about the origin of livestock there.
Yeah, for instance. But as you said, other standards.
Yeah,
that are being
animal
weakened.
Welfare, right, hydroponics.
And these are things that actually, the American public cares about.
Yeah.
If you tell them that, that animal's raised in confinement as opposed to being out on nice green grass, they're mad. They're say like, why am I paying extra for this product? I think that's part of why the interest in locally grown has sort of increased at the same time, because there is a sense of people that, well, if I can drive down the road and actually see that farmer, or I know that farmer, and I see their cows out on the pasture every day, I feel more confident about buying their product. We know that's not always, locally grown doesn't equate to organic or perfect standards, but I think that's part of why people have gotten more interested in that.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. Know your farmer is the best. Most people in the country won't know their farmer. Mm-hmm. They're too far from them. It's interesting. Before the Danone dump, there was a conversation that I often heard in Vermont and some in Maine, which was, organic is good here. We have great enforcement. We have great organic farms. They're very popular. They're very well supported. And talking about the Real Organic Project, they said, you're kind of stirring up a hornet's nest, but there's no hornets here. Everything is working well, maybe in Oklahoma. And I would say, well, how's it working for the dairy farmers? And they go, well, not so well. Mm-hmm. Well, of course, Horizon just announced that they're dropping 20% of the organic dairy farms in Maine and 10% in Vermont in a year. And those farms will probably go bankrupt. We don't think there's going to be, I think Stonyfields has said maybe they'll take 10 of them. Mm-hmm. So the other 79, things are not looking good. How do we make sense of that? I mean, this was something that happened so powerfully. We've been losing farms at a very steady pace just because they weren't getting paid enough to stay in business. Here, it's like, somebody just invaded the village and killed everybody. Mm-hmm. Do you think, I have talked to Danone, and basically they're saying this is just a business decision. And I'm curious about, it's interesting because Danone is a B Corp, so theoretically they have a triple bottom line, not just the profit line. And if it's just about profit, then clearly anything that you can do that's legal, you should do, according to that strategy of maximizing profit. Do you think there's a place in our world, in our businesses, to have more than maximizing profit as a goal?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, again, if customers knew when they were walking to the, organic dairy shelves that, it hasn't happened yet, but, we get to the other side of this. You see Horizon milk in your cooler, and then you see, something that's locally produced, or you see Organic Valley or someone else, and then you say, wait a minute, they're the people who dump the farmers in my state. If you knew that, you wouldn't get your hands dirty touching the carton. But, by the time that they have gotten, all these farmers off of their pickup trucks, they're no longer taking their milk, and this gets out in sort of consumers' mind, those farmers didn't have any, room or flexibility to wait. So, some kind of consumer campaign against them isn't going to be helpful if it's down the road. And kind of as you mentioned before, I agree. We have a lot of great things that go on in a state like Maine. We're small. We trust we trust the people who are doing the inspections and a whole variety of other things. But you can't free yourself up from the total market. Danone is going to replace that milk from Maine with, some giant farm in Texas or California or, I don't know where. But, we are going to be impacted. And if those 10 farmers, for instance, lose their market and somehow just decide to try to sell in the conventional market, then you've got that many more farmers selling into a market that doesn't pay enough already, and the investments they've made in being organic are lost to them. Everyone is impacted by it. So, and we say many times in Maine, no matter how small your organic farm is, very likely you are also dependent on the success of the dairying industry of our state. You might pick up manure from their farm. You might get compost from somebody who's using that manure. You might use the same tractor dealer who stays in business because the dairy farmers are using more machinery and equipment than you do. There's a whole variety of things that happen where we are completely connected. So none of us live in a little vacuum. And, it kind of goes back to that issue of, Can Danone get away with that because they're now buying from farmers who don't really follow the organic rules and don't really produce the same quality of milk? And I'm very concerned about this issue of them being a B Corp. I don't think you get to be a B Corp. That's a choice that you get to make, but it's also it's approved by the IRS. You don't get to say, like, I'm going to be a B Corp because I have really nice slogans and great graphics on my thing, on my materials and my marketing, but I don't, really care about anything but the shareholders. And so to say it was a financial decision in some ways, I think just implicates them right away and says, oh, great, so you actually don't care about the suppliers that you work with. And you don't really care about organic generally.
When I was first told that Danone had become a B Corp, and I was told about Emmanuel Faber, the CEO, and the person who told me very much believed that he meant it. And I watched a lot of clips of him talking, and I started to be convinced that he meant it too. And I was impressed. And I thought, is it possible for a large corporation like this, large multinational, to actually take on a triple bottom line? And of course, Faber was dismissed in January. I think it was January, maybe a little later this spring, because the bottom line, the profit bottom line, was off a little bit that quarter. And I thought, well, maybe it is not possible, which is a challenge, because how do we go forward? We live in an economic system that is dominated by large corporations, and I don't know the answer to this. But I see when we talk about Danone, well, who is Danone? Mm-hmm. Is it today's CEO? And is it that easy to wash away the progress that was made by some shareholders who did not believe in the triple bottom line? Mm-hmm. They believed in the single bottom line.
Right.
Yeah. So you were one of a group of senators and congresspeople who signed a letter that you sent to Secretary Vilsack about this situation. What was your hope for that letter? What did you hope that Vilsack might be able to do in response?
Well, look, this is a challenging situation, but I don't think any of us are willing to throw up our hands and walk away yet. So again, I think the USDA has a lot of responsibility in taking care of American farmers and their markets. And this is, for many of us, an example of what can happen if not everyone has to follow the same rules, for instance, when it comes to the organic standards. So, I mean, one of it is to build a fire under them and say, look, there are consequences to your lack of action, to the multiple years people have spent dragging their feet, not getting this done. Yes, it's different ag secretaries and, different circumstances, but I mean, that's number one. Number two is we've just gone through this massive, horrific pandemic. We're not out on the other side yet, but we have, as members of Congress, appropriated a lot of funds to support farmers and to support the supply chains. So this is, part of impacting the supply chain. So will there be money that can be directed towards some of these farmers, and how can we be of best assistance? And are there some big picture things that we should think about? I mean, a lot of the money we're talking about today in Congress and in agriculture is about the lack of infrastructure. I work all the time on trying to get more slaughterhouse capacity because people want to raise locally grown meat, but there's not a place to take it. And same with dairy processing. There was a wonderful project in Maine, the Moo Milk people, who tried very hard to get another way to produce locally raised milk. But they didn't get across the finish line to really have a successful bottling capacity and distribute their milk. Perhaps if they were there today, this wouldn't even be an issue. I mean, that was the last time Horizon canceled a bunch of contracts, and that was the response. But if we had had the USDA behind us then, would we have had the funding? If we had understood the value of more local infrastructure then, which Secretary Vilsack talks to us about all the time now, and our committee was very specific about saying that has to be some of the funding in this bill, because part of the supply chains falling apart was people turned to local farmers and said, can I buy from you? Can I buy from you? Can I join a CSA? So anyway, that's a lot of different topics, but we're saying, look, all this stuff is coming to a head. We actually have money there. This is a clear case of taking some action, and what are you going to do, to work with this and support this? So I think that's how the members of Congress who represent Northern New England, also there's quite a few of those farmers in upstate New York, are saying, we have to take some action here, and we just can't let this be another, sad story where 79 farmers go out of business. I would say on a more direct level, there are farmers who we've heard from who are in the middle of like restructuring an FSA loan, or right in the middle of something. But if your market is suddenly tenuous, you might be dealing with a USDA, organization, and they say like, oh, sorry, I don't think we can restructure that loan. And so we're trying to intervene even on that, granular of a level, and just say like, hey, don't count these people out because they've been the circumstances of something much bigger than them. So, we're upset, and I just think, I don't want to diminish this, but it is a teachable moment. It is a chance for people to see the consequences of inaction and the real challenges that the farmers who we appreciate, who are part of our communities, who we all value, who we drive past, or we buy products from, and we want to say like, hey, we don't want to leave you out there just hanging out to dry.
Well, that's great. The Real Organic Project has always held this dual thing of there are a whole bunch of people who want the food that farmers like these farmers are producing, and there's a whole lot of farmers who want to produce such food. And it seems to me like an incredible opportunity and a tragedy if we can't connect those two groups, and because then the eaters end up being misled. When they go and get the picture of the milk carton with a happy cow on it, and that cow lives in the desert in Texas and has never been on grass in its life, that I think is fraud. And I think it's an interesting question whether all of that is too big to fail. I had a conversation with Miles McAvoy at the USDA once, with his boss, Eleanor Starmer, wonderful, wonderful woman. And I said, Miles, if we don't call a moratorium on hydroponics now, it's going to be too big to fail. And he said, if we go through on the animal welfare reform, which he fully intended to, it's It's going to decertify over 70% of the so-called organic eggs in America. So don't tell me that I'm afraid of too big to fail. Well, good fighting words, but Miles is gone, the animal welfare reform is gone, and the CAFOs are still here. I think they were too big to fail. They had strong bipartisan congressional support to kill that. So do you think it's possible to reform this? And if so, is the first necessary step to create a movement demanding that reform?
I think you bring up a very valid question, and I think you're absolutely right that we create entities in agriculture that are too big to fail, just as we do in banking and everywhere else. And I think that you're right, we've gone a little bit past that tipping point. That said, maybe I'm a Pollyanna or optimist, but it's like, this is our mission. I don't think we ever get to just step back and say like, oh, we lost that one, because then we just lose the next one and the next one and the next one. And so I think it's critically important that in spite of that, we figure out a way to fix this. And I do think, I've seen amazing power in the movement of consumers, basically the eaters, who have changed the face of agriculture, who have created the demand for locally grown or organic food. And, through both of those movements, in a sense, we've created new markets and we've expanded the opportunities for farmers. But we're not supporting them enough. We don't have standards that people can trust. And so, in a sense, that creates a little bit of chaos, like on the internet, where people are like, oh, is that safe? Is that safe? Is that safe? Well, that's why we have the USDA. That's why we have organic standards. And it goes back a little bit to, continuing to push on that. But I think the consumer movement is incredibly strong. I really do think that, if we were able to position all these things in just the right way, and suddenly you could go to your dairy, fridge in your grocery store and say like, oh my goodness, look at that Horizon milk. They're cutting out local farm. If you had that information in front of you, they would already see a huge decline in people buying their product. And it would it would impact them, and they would start to say like, maybe we're going to upset some consumers around this, and who are we without our consumers? Who are we without our brand loyalty? And I think that, that has to be an important component of this. Yeah. But you're right, we have created the increasing demand for these products, organic food, has created a system where too many players who don't comply have been allowed in, and they're filling the demand right now.
Yeah, and they're not just filling demand, they're running the show. I mean, we have a problem. We talk about reform, like passing the origin of livestock or the animal welfare, which are very important things, but the pasture rule exists, it's just not enforced. Right. We fought like hell to get that, and we got it. We think, oh, gosh, we got the pasture rule. I don't think it's being enforced. And everyone blames, well, that's the certifier's fault. Well, that's the USDA's fault. That's the milk buyer's fault. The buck doesn't seem to stop anywhere. Mm-hmm. I had a conversation with a series with Michael Pollan, and we were talking about the vertical integration of everything, mm-hmm. of our world. And he said, the Sherman Antitrust Act was not passed in order to protect consumers from high prices. It was passed in order to protect democracy. Mm-hmm. That was the purpose, to stop too much concentration of capital into too few hands. And I think that one of the things that's confusing now is, Earl Butt's religion has become the law of the land, and in fact, the food is cheap, mm-hmm. and all of the corporate organic is cheap. It's cheap. It's cheaper than real organic, I would say, because it's not following the same rules. Nonetheless, you can say, well, look, it's growing because the price is low. And in that process, we see a very small number of people are controlling actually what the rules are and what gets enforced. Do you think that we might see some antitrust enforcement coming up?
It's, I think, a growing topic in Congress. I mean, I know there are members who are working on antitrust legislation relating to agriculture, and I think we're seeing the frustration with this at all levels. I think we're hearing it from farmers who aren't organic, just this antitrust, as you said, vertical integration, consolidation of the industry, giving more power to fewer players. And back to your sort of original point, we're all worried for the health of our democracy right now. And the gap between those people who own capital in this country and don't is as great as it's ever been. And so much of what we try to figure out today is our tax policy appropriate? Do many of these big corporations even pay any taxes? Which keeps them, very solvent because they don't have to worry about, paying in their fair share. So yeah, I think that is a very important part of this, and I think there's a lot of members of Congress who are really trying to focus on, okay, how do we move forward on this and get back to where we were supposed to be around regulating, how commerce works in our country.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been following lately is the Farm to Fork initiative in the EU, which just got voted in by the European Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big deal. I was just amazed that they can pull this off. They've got the same industries we have, the same corporations, and they seem to keep passing pretty good stuff. Unfortunately, the response to that initiative from the USDA has been basically, over my dead body will I let this happen. So we're now in a serious fight, and it's a fight, I think, for people reading about it in the paper, it seems like an obscure issue, how much of European agriculture is organic and whether they reduce pesticide use. Although they're talking about reducing it by 50%, mm-hmm. and they're talking about taking organic up to 25%. But they're also talking about how this spreads around the world. So talk about the whole infrastructure. They're talking about, is Africa going to become a place that is chemical agriculture, that is chemical industrial agriculture, or is it going to have a different model of how food is grown? And some of that food, some of the fiber and all that comes to the EU, some of it comes to America. America has an issue where they go, this is our new market, the rest of the world, for all of our equipment, for all our pesticides, mm-hmm. for all our fertilizers. Do you have any thoughts about this battle and the USDA's position?
It's a really important fight, and I would say it's one of the valuable opportunities we have if the United States doesn't try to crush what they're doing in the EU. And you're right, through the USDA, particularly in the last administration, there was a strong push to disallow them from doing that, to punish them with trade rules. There was a whole thing set up in some of those trade agreements to harmonize the rules. And really harmonize, I think, was a way of saying, we're going to take your rules down to our level. We're not going to find a middle ground, of how we cooperate. I think it's incredibly important. I think they're a very powerful force right now in this conversation, and I think we can't take the pressure off of our USDA to disallow them from saying, like, we're going to retaliate if you try to set a higher standard. This is a powerful lobby working on this, and I don't want to diminish the challenges of this battle. It's often said that the lobby related to food and agriculture is larger than the defense industry lobby. And, most of us think about, it's the weapon systems where the real fights are. No, it's actually food systems, how we grow our food, the agriculture, the food processors. And of course, they have many economic reasons to not want to be held to a higher standard. Once again, I think part of the challenge is that I think some of this comes from engaged consumers in the EU who are not going to allow these standards to drop. And, a variety of things that probably make it somewhat easier to stick with their standards. I I don't completely know how to guarantee that this, happens, that we don't just roll right over them. But I think we have some opportunities in this battle to not let, sort of the forces of big ag win. And you're right, it has a huge impact on agriculture in the rest of the world. A little bit of a opportunity now, and it's a paradox too, but it is the increased interest of the world in climate change. The knowledge that, we have to act now. And unfortunately, that's getting, more clear by the day. Every severe weather, activity reminds us that we're in a very vulnerable position, and it's getting worse by the day. And a growing understanding of the role that agriculture plays, or the positive benefits. If we were all organic farmers, the amount of carbon we'd sequester in the soil worldwide would go a long, long way to reducing the carbon in the atmosphere. We're not. But I do think this opening conversation, which I'll fully admit, could be co-opted or greenwashed, but about, soil health, organic matter in the soil, different practices, does raise the level of awareness that we have to do things differently. And I think that takes a little bit of the steam out of trying to go against the EU's regulations, because some of this is based on their understanding that they have to act on climate change and that there's consumer demand to do that. And I think the consumer demand for products that are grown in a sustainable way related to climate change, not just public health or personal health, is growing all the time. That's just tricky because we don't want to let, corporations say, oh, I did these two things, or big ag say that, and then get away with, pretending it's, environmentally friendly or climate change friendly or whatever the label becomes.
Yeah. I heard a fascinating talk about sort of the birth of greenwashing. There's been PR around these kind of issues forever, but greenwashing was really invented by the oil companies when they realized, before almost anyone else, that climate change was going to be a reality.
Right.
And they saw a big problem on the horizon, and they started what they called green PR. And it was a fascinating strategy. Their strategy was not fight it. Mm-hmm. We want to compromise. We want to work together. We see that this is real. So give us a seat at the table, and let's figure out compromises that we can actually make things better. And of course, once you have Godzilla sitting at the table, it's very hard not to give them whatever they want. It really is. And I just thought, what an interesting story of this. I feel the same thing happens in organic now. It's like people aren't fighting organic. They're saying, thank you, we'll take it. Mm-hmm. And we'll make it into what we want, but we won't change our actions. We'll change how we label them. So this is the reality we'll have to deal with. I think you were maybe the first person that made me realize that more money is spent lobbying for food than for defense. I think people think food is kind of this boring thing, and it's not. It's at the core of our economy, and it's at the core of what kind of a democracy are we going to be in 15 or 20 years, and what kind of a planet are we going to live in 15 or 20 years? So.
Mm-hmm. No, it's where some of the biggest arguments we're having right now converge. I mean, the issues related to hunger and SNAP benefits, and who qualifies to eat, school lunches. I mean, the idea that we even debate hunger in this country, or have the idea that anybody should go without eating food, is really unthinkable. But then how we grow that food, who's able to grow that food? Do we support, family farmers? It sort of covers every one of our major issues in one way or the other.
Yeah, that's right. When I started in this, I was just finding hydroponic tomatoes on the market. I was like, well, that's not right. We agreed back in 2010. Right. And I started to pull the string, and all of a sudden it was connected to everything. Yeah. And it is. Everything is connected. So Chellie, I know you're busy. Are there any final thoughts that you have that you would like to share?
mean, I think the only thing I'd share is that, I feel a sense of urgency, that some of these fights have been going on for years, decades. This sort of movement around organic has changed and been a battleground for years. But whether it's climate change or the consolidation of wealth or the destruction of the family farm, all of these things are right upon us, and
health
and
human
the
health.
Pandemic to it,
Well,
and human health,
obesity and
yeah.
nutrition. The
I mean, it's all there, and it's all about how are we going to live in the future? Who's going to be left out? And frankly, will we even survive into the future? I mean, we are really on a precipice here. So I feel these battles are more urgent than ever. It requires everyone's engagement, and I really do think there's an enormous amount of willingness to participate. Part of it is helping people to figure out, how do I engage? What do I do? How do I stand up for the things I believe in? And that may be the most common question I ever get asked if I'm speaking to a group or just talking to people. They'll say, well, what should I do? What should I do? And if you're a consumer, understanding better, like, where are the real battlegrounds and what are the fights you should take on? And I think that, is on all of our shoulders, is to say, okay, how do we strategize these battles so that people who want to be engaged can be as effective as possible, whether it's a farmer or a consumer or somebody who, works in politics but isn't exactly sure which battle to fight. So we have our work cut out for us.
So what's the first step for somebody who's asked that? What do you suggest? Well, the first thing you can do.
I often say, especially if it's somebody who I don't, know directly, I'm talking with someone in some other state, I say, the first thing you should do is you should find out if the community that you live in has a plan for a sustainable future. You should find out if the state legislators in your state are actively engaged in this, because frankly, there are a lot of state legislators who are, making an impact and making change every day when Congress at times can't act. And then, it sort of becomes this, well, how do, it's just saying to people, you have to really understand, are you buying a product that's exactly what you wanted or isn't it? And I think, again, that's on some of us to make sure that information is out there for people. And that's why these kind of campaigns to, fight Horizon are important, is to say, you got to know what's going on here in your own community, in your own state, and with the food that you think is safe and good to eat.
Yeah. I've always said that Vermont is a little state. Calvin Coolidge called it the brave little state, but it has an outsized impact, and I think that's true of Maine too.
We do.
We have powerful microphones for such a small population.
Yeah. And we've become a good example of how to do some things right, and we have to make sure. I mean, I find that very helpful, because at times when colleagues will say to me, oh, that'll never work, I say, let me tell you about how this, has happened in my state or what happens here. But we've got such a long way to go. Yeah.
All right, Chellie Pingree, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you. Thanks for the work you're doing. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you'll subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a rating and review. A video version of this interview, as well as the full transcript with links related to our conversation, is found at realorganicproject.org/episode 51. Please join us next time when our guest is Mark Castell. He's the co-founder of the Cornucopia Institute and more recently of the industry watchdog organization Organic Eye. To find a real organic farm near you, visit realorganicproject.org/farms. See you next time.